sometimes in these countries when conflict erupts and there are huge humanitarian needs, there's little attention from the world to these conflicts. And why do we need this attention? For two reasons. One, we need international powers to exert as much effort as possible in order to stop the fighting, to contain this conflict, because every day fighting rages on. That means more suffering, more people killed, more people displaced.
Sudan is a country that was already hugely dependent on international aid. UN agencies say a third of the 46 million population relied on support from overseas before this recent conflict erupted. And now, of course, the humanitarian situation is deteriorating. Rula Amin is a senior advisor on the Middle East and North Africa at UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. Rula, welcome to the programme.
Well, thanks for having me.
Just in terms of Sudan's dependence on humanitarian aid before this conflict, what sort of level are we talking about there? What was your presence there? And with that in mind, how much are you going to have to intensify humanitarian efforts as a result of this conflict?
Unfortunately, even before this crisis, Sudan was, and the population and the civilians in Sudan were already in dire need of humanitarian assistance. We were already, as UNHCR and other UN agencies, we had presence in Sudan to support those who need help. And that includes more than 3.8, around 4 million people who were displaced inside Sudan. They are Sudanese, but had to flee their homes looking for safety in the past few years due to past crises. Sudan has seen many conflicts, and until this crisis happened, there were already 4 million people who were outside their homes. And despite the challenges, Sudan was also hosting more than 1 million refugees from other countries. So imagine, we had almost 5 million people who were displaced from their homes inside Sudan even before this crisis. Now, these people, along with other Sudanese, are caught in this very vicious fighting, and they are trying to flee for their lives. It's very challenging, very difficult to try to leave. And those who are still in their homes have no electricity, no water, very severe shortages of food, and fuel is very expensive.
Sorry, Rula, do go on. Yes, I was just going to say, go on.
As a humanitarian agency, because of the deterioration in the security situation, we had to suspend some of our activities to deliver this much needed assistance because it became so unsafe. And now we're trying to scale up, but we need, and we are calling on all parties to guarantee the safety of humanitarian workers, to allow humanitarian passages for humanitarian workers to reach all those who need assistance, and there are millions of them.
Wow. So at this point in time, you're struggling even to get workers into the areas where aid is required?
Well, actually, we have workers in the areas where the fighting has intensified. The problem is we have very limited ability to move because it's so unsafe. There is no respect to international laws to allow humanitarians and to guarantee them safe passages in order to reach people. So we have relief items inside the country.
Okay.
We have colleagues, national colleagues, who are still in Sudan, but unfortunately with a very limited ability to move, especially in the areas like the capital where the fighting has intensified. In other areas, we are around, and we are also around in neighboring countries where many Sudanese and other nationals had crossed the border looking for safety.
Okay, I understand. In this context, we often talk about international support and the international community, and I'm often I feel like it's sometimes quite ambiguous. What does that mean in the context of what is happening in Sudan? What would the support from the international community, what would that look like?
Well, there are twofolds, and I'm really grateful that you asked that question and that you're hosting me to talk about it, because one of the main challenges we have is that sometimes in these countries when conflict erupts and there are huge humanitarian needs, there's little attention from the world to these conflicts. And why do we need this attention? For two reasons. One, we need international powers to exert as much effort as possible in order to stop the fighting, to contain this conflict, because every day fighting rages on. That means more suffering, more people killed, more people displaced. The other thing is, of course, support to humanitarian agencies like UNHCR to be able to provide all the much needed assistance to the people. And that includes shelter, water, food. They need all kind of support at this moment, and then they need solutions. The urgent need is for the fighting to stop. And that needs an international will to force the parties to resort to dialogue and negotiations. But the most important, if that doesn't happen immediately, is to provide much needed financial assistance to humanitarian agencies in order to allow us to reach all those who need assistance.
Yeah.
Even before this crisis happened, our budget to reach all those who needed assistance in Sudan was really severely underfunded. What does that mean? It means we had to face very difficult choices to choose whom to give assistance to and whom we don't give assistance to when they both need it. But it's about more need, more vulnerability. And that's a very difficult situation. A lot of people need a lot of help.
Just a final question for you, Rula, and I wonder if you worry about international support now that most Western nations have completed the evacuation of diplomats and citizens from Sudan. Does that suggest to you a level of stepping back, actually, from involvement in alleviating the suffering there and indeed trying to stop the fighting?
We are really hoping not. We're advocating with all the international powers, regional powers, those who are capable of having influence and those who are capable of financing humanitarian operations. More importantly, my colleagues are on the ground, and when they talk to those refugees who cross the border after hours of grueling journeys, they speak of horrors that they had seen, and they are very worried and very scared for those they left behind, their families, their loved ones. So that's why we're saying we really need the world's attention. We need the world's support, financial support, political support in order to stop the fighting and provide assistance.